Natal, welcome to the Management Podcast. How are we doing?
Really well, very well. I have had a day of back-to-back meetings, but very happy to be now here with you.
This is good. So if at any point I bore you and I see you taking a nap, it's absolutely fine. I won't take it personal. Oh, maybe I will.
Well, I have my lemon and ginger tea, so we'll be all right.
Living life on the edge together.
Exactly.
I've got a good cup of tea with me as well. So yeah. So I guess, Natal, obviously we know each other for a little bit now. We've gone back and forth. We've talked on LinkedIn. We've had like chats, virtual chats and stuff. But before I get into all that good stuff, I'd like to ask my guests what their logline is. So what would yours be?
So I'm not totally sure, but if it's a collection of words, words that come to mind is energetic, so high energy. I'm an activist, so I'm an old protester at heart, and I try and activate for change, and I take a few risks in life, and I like to experiment.
Okay. Nice.
So I think that's an energetic activist experimenter.
Yeah, nailed it. Perfect. And before we get into kind of who you are and what you do, I ask my guests to pick a number between 1 and 10. Okay, and what that happens, depending on what number you pick, we'll link to what I call a killer question. And I'll ask you that question. I don't need to know the answer just yet, but it's going to be something what I'll come back to. So I guess, pick a number between 1 and 10.
5.
Okay, 5. Okay, so the question what you've picked is, what is one life lesson you learned the hard way?
Oh, God.
So we will come back to that.
Just
one. But yeah, I guess, for my listeners, they might not be as fortunate as me to know you, but maybe, give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of kind of who you are, your career, and who is Natal?
So who is Natal? I'm an Aussie that lives in Scotland for the weather, and and that's sort of a little bit of who I am. I've traveled around a bit in life. If you want sort of more how that's influenced the working side of my life, I like every good Aussie. I landed in London at 25. I was only staying on someone's couch for a few days. And then 10 years later, I went back to Australia for a while. And like a lot of Aussies back at that time, I worked in financial markets. But I quickly realized I was much better with people than numbers. And that still holds true. And so I found myself working actually in sort of coaching and training, but for financial markets. So I used to coach people on financial skills. I then moved into, team building, management development, but all very much business. And I didn't even sit in the world of HR at that time. So I was even a consultant for a number of years where I ran learning programs for businesses. And then I got hired by one of my clients to be a head of learning and leadership. And it was the first time I sat in HR, actually. And at first, I was horrified that all these people would come and ask me about grievances and pay, and suddenly I was, this company didn't do themselves many favors. We were behind this kind of secure door, and we were the bad HR people. And that was my first, and I was just shocked. And I used to say to people, "Oh, but I'm good HR. I'm cool HR. I'm learning and development," kind of thing. And then over a number of years, I embraced it and went, "Oh, no. I can get into this people side of the business. What is the people strategy?" And I actually went back to university and did something that was much more related to the world I'm in now. And then just started to build a career on that people strategy side. It's always been kind of talent, learning, culture, all of that kind of aspect of what would be known as human resources. And then about 8 years ago, I talk about the 25 box matrix that tipped me over the edge. So I was at a large bank in the Netherlands, and I was a global head of talent, and I was trying to decrease the amount of boxes that we used to assess talent from 25 back to the standard 9. And I thought, that's not what this is about. We've got, this is just about process. We've lost the meaning. And that's what sort of embarked me on this, I suppose, this journey that led me to Agile that we'll talk about later. But I went looking for, how do I get back to building great places to work? Why are we here? What is the people's strategy of the business, not just this process? So that's kind of a potted history. And in that time, I've lived in Sydney, I've lived in Amsterdam, I've lived in London and Brighton. And these days I'm in a tiny little town in Scotland.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot to pull apart here. And what I like to do, I guess, with guests is go right back to childhood, first and foremost. Mm-hmm. If I was to ask your parents, your close friends, tell me a little bit about Natal from, I don't know, from 10 years to her teens. What do you reckon they'd say to me?
I was the total, so I was the loud one, and I was first of all, I was of course, in the netball team, and then I was in the touch rugby team. I played actually for New South Wales, which is a state that I lived in.
Nice.
I grew up in the classic beach town of Australia, so beautiful beaches, little surf town, a few hours drive along the coast down from Sydney. I would say from about 15, I just did everything I could to get out of this little town. So once I got to 18, I studied my heart out to make it to Sydney University, and I got into the course that I wanted, and I was out of there. And I was known for hosting the best parties out of school, and most kind of big cool parties happened at my house, probably because I had an irresponsible father, and that kind of allowed me to get away with that.
Okay. So I guess there's something around the activism, the kind of protest of the risk. There's, you mentioned right at the start around the risk and the experimenting, and then there's the travel, and then there's, Brighton and wherever you've been. I guess there's two probably questions before I get into the travel and stuff. When was the first time you ever remember getting in trouble?
God, pretty young. When did it? I know I remember quite a serious one where I bunked off school to kind of essentially party, and that was quite a bad one. I suppose I was always known for someone to say what I thought about a situation, but I was also known as someone that, so I like to think I straddled the side of nerd and I don't know, what are you, not the naughty kid, but I would go at lunchtime, I'd go and kind of smoke with the cool kids, but in class I used to sit with the top kind of grade kids, because I enjoyed intelligent political debate and was really passionate about my studies. I've always been into kind of, I suppose, academia and learning. I love that. But I then had this little streak where I liked to defy things and party and kind of do the things that you weren't supposed to.
Nice. It kind of reminds me of a bit of a chameleon, right? You can be the cool kid over here and smoking, and then you can also be this person who's really into kind of debate and like really with, like, say, with the, I think you use the words of like the clever kids, if you like. So where does the travel come from? Like, where did that stem from?
Maybe so my mother is Scottish, and my grandparents migrated to Australia when she was about 12. So I grew up with these very Glaswegian grandparents, and and in Australia, it's very multicultural. So a lot of my family, and then a lot of people I knew came from somewhere else. And, a lot of us were either, first generation or not even. And there is also this thing in Australia, and I grew up in a little town, I just was fascinated and, I just wanted to learn so much about the rest of the world, and just even get out of my little town. I wanted to make it to, at least to Sydney, and kind of explore and understand what it was to live these lives that I would read about in books and hear about, on the radio. And I was very into music, and of course all your bands came from somewhere else. And definitely, every Christmas at the grandparents on my mother's side, I'd get put on the phone to these people I couldn't understand that were speaking Scottish, and to talk to me. And so there was always this connection with other places, I suppose. And so you grow up wanting to see these places. And I knew from a very early age I wanted to travel. But I didn't, unlike all my friends' children these days, they're all on planes by 2, 5, going to different countries. Like, I just had a friend over from Australia. She's got her 2 little ones with her. I didn't do any of that. I don't think I even got out of the state that I lived in until I was about 16. It was just, we didn't have that much money. I didn't have that much opportunity. So I think it was also, I knew I had to do it myself once I could have the chance. Yeah.
Nice. So you're currently in in Scotland now. What's you mentioned? I think you mentioned Brighton. You mentioned a few other places. What's been the favourite place to kind of spend some time in? And it's easy to go to Scotland because I'm here now. But yeah, what comes to?
So every place, there's reasons why you love them, and sometimes it's because of people. In terms of an experience, I would say, where I live at the moment in Scotland is just a really beautiful place, and I live in beautiful countryside, surrounded by nature. There's no cars hardly where I am, and I live a very healthy life as a result. But it reflects where my age and what I've done in life. So I remember when I first moved to Scotland, we were in this little village, and there were, the neighbours came over for dinner, and they had some adult children. And so the adult children came along, and they were horrified when they learnt that so my partner and I met in Amsterdam. We'd just moved from Brighton. I came from, lived in Sydney and London. They're like, oh my God, how could you move here? This is, you're going to hate it. All I want to do is go to these places. And we said, well, it's because that we've been to these places that Scotland now seems so attractive. And I would definitely say that, I loved London. I was the ultimate London party girl for quite a few years, but I couldn't return to that now. I still think Amsterdam is probably a city that kind of straddles a bit of it's got a nice sort of community, almost small town feel to it, despite being a big city. So, but yeah, there's different reasons why you live in certain places. And then, but I think no matter what, where I grew up has some of the most beautiful beaches in the whole world. And whenever I go home, it is just magical. And it kind of ruined going to the beach for me, because every beach I've ever been to around the world, particularly Brighton, it's a bit crappy, to be honest. Like the sand is not that white, the water's not as clear, and there's usually way too many people there, and you don't get the wave to yourself. So yeah.
And you don't get sharks and box jellyfish and all this cool stuff.
Well, where I grew up, you don't get a lot of those things. Yeah, there's other things that can kill you, but not so much in the water.
I mean, there's something which, the bit what you mentioned about at the start, the kind of the protester and the kind of experimenter and stuff like that. And I guess it's interesting when you kind of, the person who would go behind, a bike shed smoking and stuff is now the kind of, I guess, I want to use a disruptor, but it's not. There's something around just speaking your mind, and you mentioned there having a point of view, and there's something around. Is that, how do you find that now? Like, there's something around in the working world, like having a point of view can often either be your unique selling point, or often well, he's too out there, or she's too out there, or whatever. Like, how do you find that?
Well, I think there is learning to navigate the context in which you're operating at any one time. I think it's getting that balance of how do you express. Let me just go back. I actually not a great believer of just expressing opinions with nothing sitting behind it. So, and I think we live in a world where there's too much of that.
Yeah.
And so if I make a statement, I like to think that I can back it up in some way with either data or at least my own experience, and I can talk from that. And I would say I'm an activist, but it's from a place of caring. So I speak out when I see that something needs to be improved, or that we need to save the planet, or we need to change human resources for the benefit of humans. So for me, I feel that there's a purpose, and maybe that is a true activist is trying to change the world for the better. An opinionated, controversial kind of speaker is just trying to get clicks and get likes, I think. And so I hope that I differentiate myself in that way.
It's interesting, isn't it? The currency of organizations is the stories we tell and the stories we share. And but yet the external lens on the social media, on LinkedIn, on whatever else, is exactly that. It's the thing what's going to trigger us to get the like, to get the whoa, this contrarian point of view. And I find it quite fascinating how them worlds often differ and I'm not even sure if it's for the best reasons or the worst reasons. So I guess still sticking with, in fact, let's just go back to the present day. You've got a treasure chest, and in that treasure chest, you're allowed to put one memory in there. What memory would you put in there? You
keep wanting me to just choose one. I don't know if you've noticed that I'm hopeless at just choosing one. One memory.
Just one memory. Just one. Do you see why I don't give the guests any questions in advance?
What, professional or personal?
Anything you want. Anything you want.
Oh God. One memory. I think it's also reflective of where the conversation has gone. So you've taken me back to my childhood. So I'm thinking a lot about when I was growing up. So now I'm thinking, maybe one of those.
I tell you what, because we're friends, I'll let you have one professional and one personal. There we go.
All right. Okay. And this is where I'm supposed to say it's when I met my partner, isn't it? So one of since I've gone back in time in my memories, I'm going to choose. I would think I was about 18 or 19, and I went to the Big Day Out, which is a big music festival in Sydney. Okay. And I was a huge Rage Against the Machine fan at the time. So I was there. I had my Doc Martens, my cargo pants, and I was a grunge girl. And we heard the couple of riffs of the first song, and I was in this group, and we just started running, and we just ran from this other part of so it's a huge music festival, not as big as say Glastonbury, but quite large. And we were running, and you were sort of pushing people over and running all to the mosh pit. And we realized people were doing that from across the whole of this big stadium area. And then we all kind of got in there, and then it then became one of the most scariest moments of my life when entering a uncontrolled mosh pit of Rage Against the Machine as an 18-year-old girl was pretty full on. But that moment, I remember feeling so energized by the concept of music and living differently and feeling alive and look at me. And so that's going to be a memory. And I was with some of the best friends that are still very close to me today. Professionally, look, I think that so I sometimes have conversations with usually human resources professionals and sometimes younger professionals, and they say, "Oh, Natal, this meetup that you've just done or this talk, you've got me excited about my job again. I was thinking of leaving, and what you're talking about and what you've got me excited about has reconnected me to my job." And when I have those kind of conversations, it just makes my day. And I had one again. I was in a conference last week, and when people say that, I think, yes, this is what it's for, because there's nothing better than that. So
it's quite interesting, that, because I think it's a two-way street, right? Again, I'm speaking from my point of view, but tell me if this is different. But I think when you're in this world, which we are, which is bringing agile in, new ways of working, approaching people experience, employee experience very differently, and from a product lens, I guess, I personally find it quite draining. You're going against years and years and years of legacy and thinking, and a lot of it is just male, stale people who have been there for donkeys of years, and actually by challenging their thinking, you're challenging the last 20 years of their career or whatever. So I quite like the idea of that being a mutual benefit. But I guess other than that, how do you, because you're a progressive thinker, your books are great, which we'll get into in just a sec. But but yeah, how do you keep your energy up? Because I imagine, you face the same sort of challenges as much as the person who you're inspiring, who's coming up to. How do you kind of keep that energy up, I guess?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people ask me that. I think because my style is very high energy, I talked about earlier. So particularly my presenting style. I think on one hand, I'm a classic extrovert that gets energy from other people and from kind of conversation and that social environment. So, but I also, it's when you, I think it has to be two ways, because if it was only me pushing against that and always challenging and not getting any positive feedback and endorsement back, then I don't think I could keep going. So, it was, I was speaking at a conference just the other week, and the male stale and pale was on full display. So I was the second speaker, and the one before, and I don't want to, now people are going to look up where I was, but there was primarily middle-aged white guys were the speakers. And I'm sorry, but some of them were not talking about anything new. They had the worst slides you have ever seen. I can't believe they were putting them up. And I was like, are we sorry? How did you even get invited, let alone paid to speak? And what are you giving to this audience? And in that, I got some very specific feedback from a few people about how they valued what I was talking about, and how it challenged their thinking, and it's made them really, they felt that it connected to what they were experiencing, and they felt they walked away with practical things to do. And so I think it's that. I think it's, if I didn't get those little moments of feedback, yes, often from other women or younger people or people in industries that maybe are doing something a bit different. But I tell you what, when someone comes up from a very traditional industry that's been doing this for years and says, "You've reignited my love for HR," then I'll take that. That's yeah. So yeah, and you get the messages on Facebook, LinkedIn, and others, and that's what keeps you going. Definitely, yeah.
Nice, nice. So I guess let's get into the working world. If you could put a billboard outside the stadium, and this billboard, everyone who's in the stadium is all people from HR, employee experience, people ops, everything within that world. And everyone's going to leave this stadium and see your big billboard. What's the message you would put on that billboard for all of them to see?
What's the problem you're trying to solve?
Okay. Walk me through that.
Well, so if we might get into techniques and things, but both of us are big believers in experimentation, testing, valid, having data, understanding the experience, being product led, all these concepts. But it all comes back to solving problems. And I think the traditional model of human resources, or maybe where we've got to in the profession, particularly with our functional silos. And when I say functional silos, I mean learning and development, recruitment, talent, reward, well-being. I feel that we push out content, we go to the solution straight away. And it's made worse by the fact that our industry is full of people peddling the solutions as well, which often consultants like myself do. And what it actually needs to come back to is what problem are you solving, and how do you mobilize the right skills, the right techniques, and also the partnership with either the business or the organization or society around that problem. And if we take it into some fundamental things linked to human-centric design or also product design in itself, products have to solve a problem for customers. It's why you buy products. You buy a product to solve a problem for you, or there's lots of concepts, jobs to be done, moments that matter. All of those link back to this idea that value is linked to the fact that it solved a problem for you, and you want to use it again, and you want to keep going back to that. And the more that we take that into our world, the more that it becomes less about us and more about the people that we're solving the problems for, but also the organization in which we're sitting in, or the context in which we're operating in. And I think the more that we have to, in modern business, more and more, we have to be getting comfortable with multiple layers of customer. So yes, people teams, L&D teams, employee experience, whatever you want to call us. Yeah, okay, employees and the people of the business are kind of our first level customer, but you need to understand how that values throws through to the business bottom line, and of course the end customer of whoever that organization is selling the product to or delivering services to. But more and more, we're also needing to understand, how does that impact the planet in which we live? How does that link into the community in which we operate? And so they talk a lot about stakeholder capitalism these days. So how do you actually build solutions that is thinking of these multiple layers of customer in the solution that you're building? And you can only do that by understanding the problem you're trying to solve. So take it back to the problem. And then also, the other thing about the problem is then you can't solve every problem. So you got to prioritize, you got to decide what's the biggest juicy problem now versus this one. How do we get something done here so we can move on to the next one? As opposed to, we need to create a well-being program, or we need to redesign the performance management system. All of those things are great, but why are you doing it? And how do you know that that's more important than something else? So by taking it back to the problem, or often I call it the business challenge, then we can get better at understanding how to solve it and mobilize all the great skills and wonderful people we have in our teams.
Nice. And I think you're dead right. It's kind of two things that come to mind. So years ago when I was in L&D, I came up with the idea that actually L&D could just be a subscription service. Like people can subscribe or they don't. They opt in, they opt out. Same like how you decide if you want to go with Spotify or Netflix or whatever. And then that same subscription can be applied to the people experience, the employee experience, I imagine. Like your people decide to whether they continue to stay with the business or not. And actually, I need to come up with a better acronym of this. I come up with SPIES, but it's still a bit crappy. But like there's the services, the products, the interactions, the experiences, and then the subscription underneath. And I think whenever I'm having conversations, whether it be with clients, whether it be with, whether I'm doing fixed term contracts or whatever, 95% of what I'm doing is always the mindset. I think the switch is that mindset to see things very differently, to see it as products. And I think the companies that really get it, you can start to really start to segment these different types of businesses now. You go, that's where progression is, and that's where the archaic kind of legacy thinking is, and this is where the kind of progressive thinking is. And I guess the reason why I was really interested that you picked that is because a lot of when I come to design, I talk about sense making first, human, service, system. Like make sense of them three things first to understand what the problem is. It reminds me of that old saying of, I don't know who does it, and I know I'm going to do it a disservice here, but if you had to cut down a tree, I'd spend 8 hours sharpening the axe or something daft like that. But it's exactly that, right? Like it's really understanding the problem what you're trying to solve.
Totally, yeah.
Great. I love that. I love it. Okay, so we know that's the problem we're trying to solve, yeah? How does Agile HR do that? Walk me through that. Because, in fact, tell me what Agile HR is first, maybe. Because some of my listeners might never heard it. This might be the first time we come across it.
Sure. Well, Agile HR is not anything different to understanding what business agility is. So, first and foremost, it's about accepting that we live and now operate in a complex world. And a complex world means that problems are not easy to solve. There's no clear cause and effect, and they're adaptive. So often when you start to solve them, other things happen that you didn't foresee, both positive and negative, and they essentially keep evolving as you kind of solve them. In the world of complexity, and our business world is now, I think, a great big complex problem. So you've got constant change, huge mass communication and digitalization. You've got continuous sort of regulatory change, political change, and then, of course, things like pandemics and all of this to constantly mean that any plan that you make is not really going to hold for too long. And so in this environment, this is kind of what sits behind the concept of agility, is that you have to solve problems in a new way. And the main way you do that is you need to work emergently. And so this is the idea that you need to test, you need to gather data, you need to, try lay a few small bets and see which ones come out to understand what direction to move in. But of course, you don't want to do that by spending too much money, losing too much, face, being embarrassed, creating too much risk. So agility is actually a way of managing risk in a ever-changing, complex world, because it says if you're in an environment where you need to solve a problem, build a product, run a project, and your plans aren't going to hold for too long, then you need to be able to build the ability to adapt into that way that you run the project. So rather than planning everything up front, which is often called waterfall style, which is about the information cascading down the Gantt chart, and then you work on it for 3 months, 6 months, and the big bang implementation happens at the end. Now, that approach is fine if you think generally that plan is going to hold for that whole time. But most things now have so many dependencies, so many moving parts, that you need to be certain that what you're going to release at the end is definitely going to solve the problem. People are going to use it or buy it, and you're actually going to deliver the value. So Agile says, okay, we still got the same budget, we still got the same goals, we're still trying to achieve the same thing, but let's break it all down and let's just focus on a proof of concept first, or running a couple of experiments to see which ones work and which ones don't, so we then know which direction to go in. Or maybe actually start working on the project, but get something valuable out in, a couple of weeks, a month, and get some feedback on it and understand, is this the right direction to go? And so that's the concept of the agile cycle. So break things down into that smaller cycle that you plan rigorously. There's a huge amount of discipline about it. And, it's not just doing whatever you want, ruthless prioritization, but get data by the end of that cycle and use that data to understand, okay, when we return to the backlog or the plan, do we keep going in this direction? Or did we fail? Do we now need to pivot? Or do we now build exactly on this, but, do it in another part of the business and see what happens? And that ability, every time you go back to that plan following that cycle, you can go, all right, has our context changed? Has our budget changed? Has there been a pandemic? Is there new technology available? Has our competitor done something? And you can bring the need to adapt into your next cycle. So it's the ability to adapt and respond while building consistent, or they call it incremental value. So slice by slice, piece by piece, keep delivering value. And that's not new. So that is a business way of working that's actually been around for 20 years now. And look, there's so many debates about how to do that. There's all these different frameworks, but that's a fundamental mindset. And actually, Simon Powers, who does the Agile Onion, if you know that kind of concept, but he talks about the mindset is an acceptance of complexity, which if you accept complexity, you accept that you actually need to work and structure businesses differently to deal with that complexity. The next belief is in people. So with agility, it's saying, actually, if you form a multi-skilled team and you have all the skills in the team to get the job done, then you can be delivering that value to that customer at speed. So there's a lot of principles in Agile around self-organizing teams and, no managers and all those kind of things. But it fundamentally comes down to solve complex problems, you need a multi-skilled approach. So let's get those skills in the team and let's get them working close to the customer and making real-time decisions.
Nice.
And then I've got a mental block. What is the other one? So it's people, complexity, and
I mean, to be fair, it is, we're getting up at like 7:00 in the evening, to be fair.
I know, I've got a total mental block.
But there's something I want to needle in on a little bit. So
I'm going to come back to it.
Yeah, please. Yeah, definitely. But there's something what I really kind of there's something around this difference, and I guess a lot of time when I'm working with different people, that shift to moving from go for it.
I've got proactive, right? Of course. So this idea that the idea is that there's these other premises of the cycle that you plan at the start of the cycle, then you go off and get some work done, and then at the end of the cycle you review your work, don't you? You review what you've produced with the customer, get some data, but you also review how you've worked as a team. And people might be familiar with some of those terms of team retrospectives and things like that. And this is what links back to this concept of continuous improvement, which a lot of people talk about in the world of agility as well. But it's what propels you forward. So there's an idea that through experimentation, through working in short cycles, through looking at the data, through trying to get close to the customer, you're continuously trying to improve what you're doing. And so there's a proactivity about it, and that keeps propelling you forward. And I really like that concept of it, because it's, you've got to keep believing that you can solve this problem. And because otherwise, why are you kind of doing this? What's the belief? What's the momentum? So that's the other aspect. So I find that a nice way of describing the mindset: complexity, belief in complexity, belief in people, and belief in the proactive movement of always trying to solve the problem.
Nice. And I think the proactiveness it's probably the hardest one, right? Because a lot of these companies kind of value the safe. They value the oh, we've got to get 99.9% before we do anything. And I guess it kind of, I'm glad that came back to, because it actually links into the question I was going to ask, which is nice.
Good.
But there's one of the big shifts which I seem to spend a lot of time with clients on is moving them from a pilot to an experiment approach. You know, there's that thing for me, experiments beat pilots up every day. If you was ever to get into a ring, experiments win every time. But how do you kind of help, in your experience, like with clients you've worked with, how do you help them move from a pilot approach to an experiment approach?
So it's funny that you point that out, because I often talk about an experiment is not a pilot. So I think, but there's a sequence when the pilot does come into play. So, but the traditional approach within human resources and people teams and learning and development is that, and look, I did this, so when I ran learning and development teams, I got my big leadership program together. I've signed the vendor form. I've chosen the business school I'm partnering with. I've got the CEO and other major stakeholders in the first pilot. And can I fail? Of course not. This is massive. I've got it's scheduled in everyone's diaries for the next 6 months. I've got the coaching, panel already selected, and now I'm going to pilot this program. I can't fail. This is huge risk already. So if I get feedback that it didn't go so well, all I can do now is I'm going to tweak what I've already created. And I'm going to try and fit it around the outcomes that I'm trying to achieve. Or I might change one thing, but I can't really even change the main vendor once I've got to this stage. And I think, that's the dilemma, is that in the past, we have wanted that first pilot to be so shiny and perfect and great that we put so much energy and time into it that if it doesn't work, we can't really do too much. We can't, we've got to also save face a bit. There's a bit of an ego thing in there by that stage. So my question is always to people, can you fail? Can you fail without too much embarrassment, without spending too much money? And can you use the learning to then move quite quickly into what you need to do and what you focus on? And these days, I try and help people understand where it is in the chain. So first of all, you've got some of that kind of just very basic prototyping, proof of concept. So that could be as, you say we're designing this leadership program, but this is the way I do it this time. I would now, probably run some sessions around what problem are we actually trying to solve with this leadership program. So does it even need to be a program, we can go into that debate, but what's the problem? So is it that, managers need to be better at creating vision and purpose with their team? Is it something around how they're collaborating across the organization? Or is it that it's about certain skills that they don't have? What is the real problem here? So I would spend time doing that. And then, some basic prototyping where you might even just be sketching things out, getting immediate feedback, really, really basic stuff. But just from that, you start to then form a reality around, are some of these ideas even worth pursuing? Then you could move that into an experiment. Okay, why don't we set up, we'll set up a basic idea where we maybe, if it's still, we're going to source one business school that provides a bit of digital learning. We're going to we're going to ask them to do this project, and we're going to get them to then present this project to this person. And then we're going to, so you might put a few things together and you just run that on a very basic level and see how it went. And at that stage, you haven't invested very much money, you've a bit of time, but you'll get so much data against these hypotheses that you've got by this stage that you'll then know where to go next. Your pilot would then be at the stage where you're so confident that this is the product to now release and run that, you are opening up it across the business. You've already ran various experiments. You've got all this data to determine that it's definitely going to be successful. And now you make it a fully fledged program that everyone attends. And that's your pilot stage. So I think there's a kind of flow of steps where the pilot is still valid, but that's much later than what we think it should be in the traditional way that we've approached design. Yeah.
And again, I guess it goes back to that kind of product approach, right? It's like that constant project approach. And I think for me, when I think the difference between pilots and experiments is often when I look at the pilot, if it fails, it kills the idea like instantly.
Very true.
Right?
Yeah.
You just see it straight away. It kills the idea.
Yeah.
Where I think with an experiment, it kind of tests one feature, one tweak, and
exactly.
But I think there's a bit what happens way before all this. What I think, and tell me based on your experience, if you've seen this, like we never ever test at the right level. Like priority number one should be test desirability, but often we don't do that. And there's an analogy which I've got here, which was I was designing I guess the best way to describe it is a form of playbook, I guess, and it was around behavioral experimentation. So taking an experimentation approach and applying it to behaviors and culture crafting. And there was times and time again, like, yeah, we need this playbook. I'm like, why? Well, because I think so. I was like, your people aren't asking for it. Nobody's asking for it. You're going to invest X amount of weeks, whatever, to build this out and build it on a nice digital version and whatever else. And it's going to be like a tumbleweed because there's no need, there's no pain point. And it was fascinating to see the fact of just the mindset. Again, it's we need to build this and invest lots and lots of research, lots of resource into it. And then, for people like us who bring this mindset, like, why? No one's asking for it. There's no pain point.
Exactly. What's the problem that playbook is solving? And the best, for me, that's what's happening even at that sketch stage. So you go and take the sketch of the playbook to 5 of the stakeholders that you would give that playbook to and see their reactions. Because if they turn around and go, why do I what's a playbook? Where would I access? Why would I use this? Then straight away that this is, why would you do this? There was an interesting conversation I had just today. I'm working with a team that are looking at executive onboarding. So it's interesting, we spend all this time looking at just general onboarding, but this company realized that they don't do anything for their executives, despite them being quite costly when they leave. And of course, we're going through the design thinking sequence, and they've done a bunch of research. And of course, what's really come out is, people want that sense of belonging, that sense of connecting with other senior stakeholders and understanding where they fit and the purpose and strategy, all those good things. And then there's a bit about the process, a bit about, the infrastructure that underpins the journey of the onboarding. They need to access information, particularly if they're at an executive that's maybe come from another industry and also are new to the company. They lack information. And it was really interesting. So we're going to go and do a kind of a sprint day with a group of business representatives and people from HR. And they're like, oh, but Natal, we can already see from this research that we've done, then what we need is a SharePoint site. We need a flow chart. We need a new slide deck. And I was like, well, first of all, how do you know that if you put that information on the SharePoint site, like your playbook, that executives would even know where it is? Because do they ever go on share? Why would they even log into something like that? And how would why is that solving the problem that we're identifying here? And once they saw it like that, they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And I said, and wouldn't it be interesting as if this group we get together, they come up with a totally new idea which incorporates all these concepts, but it's in a format that you then go and test with the executives, and that's exactly what they use every day in their flow of work. And of course they would love to engage with that, and of course they would find that, and they are telling you it's solving their problem. So I think for me, all of that can be happening on a really cheap and cheerful level to begin with. It's basic prototyping at that stage. And only once you've got some evidence of, yes, people would engage with this, that you then go and mock up the first example. A good example is a team. They were looking at career development, and they did all this stuff, and they realized that one of the problems was actually not about career pathways and training and everything, was actually just making opportunities that happen in the business more visible, because there was loads of career opportunities, but no one knew how to apply for them, where they were. So they started to land on this idea of building like this marketplace website, which, these things exist. And but they went, well, how do we even know that people would use this, and why would they? So they actually mocked it up on cardboard and did these tests where they sat with different people that represented their target group. And they literally held up, and for people listening, I'm holding up a piece of paper, and they would go, okay, this has just landed in your inbox. What would you do? Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd click on it. And all right, so now this landing page has come up on your screen. What would you do? Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Oh God, no, that says link. I'm going to connect my LinkedIn profile. Oh no, I don't want to do that. Oh, okay. Why? Why what? And so they ran this sort of very formalized testing. They measured user behavior. They measured intent to use. On a 1 to 10, and apparently people were even clicking, hitting the pieces of paper. Oh yeah, I'd hit that link. Oh yeah, I'd do that. And so only after that did they have enough evidence that it was worth going and buying a trial of one of these, websites and running it for a month and seeing what happened. And that, again, that's still the experiment, written at the next stage. But why would you even go and buy the trial? You need some evidence first, and that's your desirability. Why would people use it? And yes, and the more we take it down to that very basic level, I think the better.
It's true, and it reminds me of a while back. I was designing it was for onboarding actually, for a large bank, and it was in China. And we created this whole kind of experience, this onboarding experience, and there's moments, right? I call them moves, moments of opportunity. And one of them was like, actually, you've got this experience where the staff are getting their uniforms, and actually that's a unique. There's a moment when, after based on audience insight and lots of sense making, immersion and stuff, I was like, this is a unique moment what you're not amplifying. And we looked at how we can amplify this kind of whole experience, and we turned the uniform into a boutique measurement kind of. You're getting measured up for your uniform. It's like this really unique experience. And we did all this cool stuff, but part of the kind of the onboarding was this this app of some form, and it was funny. So I tasked someone on my team, Tim, to come up with it. I was like, right, we're running in sprints, all good stuff, and it was a development opportunity for him, to be honest. And he kind of mocked up this app, and we put it on the wall, and was like, it was kind of wireframed out. And he was like, yeah, this is what's going to happen. I was like, are you sure? And he was like, yeah. And I called the receptionist in. I was like, this is the context. Show me how you're going to navigate through this. And literally 80% of it was like, move that, take that down. That was wrong. Yeah, totally. But I think little things like card sorting, we don't do that enough. We don't do that enough. Where we pop up into a canteen, we get some cards out, we get some donuts. Do you want a donut? Come put these in order of priority, whether it's manned or unmanned. And it's little things where we just don't do it enough.
No, and it made me think of a team I was working with, and they were their business challenge was essentially redesigning their internal intranet to knowledge management. How do we got all this great stuff on there. No one, we always hit, no one knows where to find it. No one can find the answers, and we want to build self-service, all this kind of stuff. And so they were doing various work. And then we designed some personas, and I said, well, you need to go and sit with these people that represent these personas and see what's happening for them. And then the next time I saw them, they're like, oh my God, they they'll access it in a totally different way to they don't even have it on their screen in the way that we thought. They're coming in on a back door that we didn't even know existed, all this kind of, so that the user behavior of what was happening was fundamentally different to how they thought it was and how they built the product. And I think intranets are great examples of that, aren't they? Because it's all this pushing of information out to employees as opposed to what's going on for the employee when they have the problem that they need an answer for. What are they doing at the time? Where would they be? What would they have in front of them on the screen? And how do we make the information easy to access at that point? As opposed to, I'm now going to go over to the intranet, I'm going to hit this and I'm going to do this. You need to know there's all this navigation to get there. So, and as you mentioned earlier, good companies get this right. So, great product experiences are because they just become part of your everyday. You can reach, unfortunately, for the addictive phone, and you can go and get, the answer that you need for what you're doing at the time, then and there on your phone. And you feel like it's enriched your life. And we can do that in the workplace, but we've got to start getting into the user experience more, the problems that people are facing and how do we solve them.
Definitely. I think a lot of the difference what I see when I look at customer experience between employee experience is the obsession. And what I mean by that is when I look at kind of employee listening and customer listening and product listening, there's a level of obsession what I see what someone has to a customer, what I don't necessarily see to the employee. I recently put out in my newsletter around, we need this consistent, we need this always on discovery, always on listening. How we see with apps or how we see with products or customers, like they're always learning, iterating, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, I don't see that in a lot of listening strategies. What I see is a survey and I see maybe a mid-year and an end-of-year survey. And I'm like, no, but the obsession's got to get worse than that. And when I say worse, I mean in the best way. Like you got to needle even more, like get really super semi-stalkerish.
But it's not just listening to, I think this is where we get, so going back to your concept of the subscription to the product earlier. So if we start to see, and I talk a bit about this at the moment in the new book. So if we see the people experience as our product and all the different components that make up that product. So yes, there's onboarding, there's exiting as well. There's the career development. There's all these different things that fit in there. And first of all, how do we see that as an overriding product that people subscribe to? They come and join the company. We've got to keep them coming back for more and giving their best work. So first of all, we've got to all see how we all contribute to that product and how we work together to make that happen. But also you've got to get continuous feedback or listening or data, whatever you call it, on that product. So you can't just listen about, oh, what do you think about this company or what do you think about this thing? You've got to then be willing to keep going back and go, all right, it's not finished yet, but what do you think of this? Does this solve your problem? Oh, and this one that's working over here, is this still solving your problem or should we get rid of that now? And do we need to, so there's this, and if you do compare it to the products that are out there, on our phones, etc., that's what's happening. I think even a team today I was speaking to, I find the people teams I work with, one of the things they really find quite vulnerable is showing unfinished work. So not just maybe an experiment feels a bit safer, but actually then getting into designing it, releasing, and running it for a couple of months, and they're like, oh, I think they fear the negative feedback as well as the good, feedback. And a lot of, I think you've mentioned this, a lot of teams I work with, they don't want to run the experiment unless they kind of know it's going to be proved correct. You know what I mean? My hypothesis is, I don't want to be wrong. And that means that we only really, we want to get the opinions and the views and things at the start of what we should do. But then when we're showing back the first idea or the the not looking so great yet product that we want to keep developing. Is this the right thing? That's what's really hard. And if we can get better at that and getting and being much more open to, it's okay because this is the product. It's not about us. It's not about, personal. It's about how do we keep making this experience awesome. And in that, there's always going to be bits that aren't working, bits that are working really well. But it's a listening about the whole thing, not just the, what's the questions of the engagement survey you always get. Will you recommend this to another?
Yeah.
Are you happy with your pay? No.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel like you belong? So someone I interviewed recently for the new book. Oh, I got it in again. Not that the book's going to be out for a while. So, but they said they're one of their big aha moments about embracing agility and human-centered design and some of the techniques we're talking about was that up until now, not only did they feel a lot of their solutions came from the needs of the people team as opposed to the needs of the business and the employees and the problem you're trying to solve, but that the user or customer was only involved in this quite long process kind of once at the start. So we did the needs analysis or we do the engagement survey, and then we go, all right, based on all this great information, we're going to go off and we're going to design and then we're going to release and maybe we'll get a bit of feedback in the next survey because they'll talk about it or it's impacted them but when none of that testing is happening throughout. And for me, the listening strategy needs to be encompassing all of that, not just that. What do you think at the start? Yeah.
100%. And you're spot on. Like, when I think about the people experience, I see it as a collection of multi-products, interactions, experiences and stuff. And I think you got me thinking about something that I was actually muddling over a couple of weeks ago, which is the feedback, the mechanisms of just constant feedback anyway. We should have that feedback to also be willing to shut things down. And I see this a lot with, it's solution seduction, right? Similar to what you said earlier, which is, well, we already know we need a SharePoint and we already know. No, you should use by your own solution here. Like, let go of it. And I was on an expert panel a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking around exactly this. I was like, we lose sight of a customer after we've done it initially. There's a bit right at the start, sense making, cool, and then you run off and work in a silo. I'm like, no. The whole idea of design thinking is you bring them along with it. And I think one of the biggest things which I've noticed design thinking is we had this initial spike of tooling, like here's some tools. And now what I'm seeing is a full circle to go, oh, you've got all the gear and no idea, because they're lacking the fundamental foundations of your customers got to be with you every step of the way. It's not a here and a here. It's they're with you throughout. I've got one more question on Agile HR, and I want to get into your new book.
I don't think I actually really properly defined it because I talked a bit about Agile, but so going back to that for anyone that's still listening is that you take all of that and you put it into the context of HR. So what I was trying to say is that it's not something new and in itself. It's taking proven ways of working that's happening within business and applying it within the world of human resources. And there's two reasons. One is because we can fundamentally revolutionize how we work by embracing agility and a lot of the tools and techniques there, because we co-create, like you've just mentioned. We're data-driven, we're evidence-based, and we get close to the customer and we build solutions of value. But this is what's happening in business. So human resources professionals have to get their head around business agility, because this is where organizations are going. And even if you don't call it agile, everyone's trying to be more collaborative, more experimental, more innovative, more value driven, more customer centric. So it's all the same themes. And we have to understand, how do you build people practices that enable organizations to achieve that? And you can't do that unless you know how to do it yourself. So for me, the two go together.
Nice. Yeah. I was going to take us down another rabbit hole.
So I've sabotaged your question.
No, I was going to take us down another rabbit hole. I was like, we'll never get to the new book. But I guess the last question, I was chatting with we weren't chatting. There was a dialogue between me and this guy from IBM. And he was talking about how 95% of IBM's interactions now are done through AI. Like 95% of them are done through AI. And I'm just wondering, what does the future of HR look like for you? Oh, are you there? Let me pause this. Sorry, yeah. Where was I going with this? So yeah, I was chatting to someone from IBM, and he was saying basically 95% of HR's interactions now is done through AI. And in one respect, I'm like, this is great news. And in one respect, I'm like, I can imagine there's a knee-jerk reaction. The same way I was having a conversation with someone from learning maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And he was like, oh, I want to get into learning. I'm going to go and do e-learning. And I'm going to do this content development. I was like, don't. Synthetic media is around the corner. Do not do that. You know. And I guess AI is a big debate. And I'm not an expert in AI. I haven't got clues, to be honest. But there's something around how we upskill. And we've talked about the idea of this anti-fragile team and the new skills and capabilities. And for me, I like the idea of the PX team or the EX team being this team of problem solvers who look at it through a real product lens and problem lens. But I guess, what's your take on it? Like, what's your take on the future of HR or employee experience?
So what I am taking out of the sort of the AI debate at the moment is that we become the editor, not the creator. So AI is coming in and speeding things up, basically, and there's good reasons why you would use AI in certain situations. I think what we've got to be mindful of, and this is where the editor comes in, is where's the data coming from that you're sourcing? What's happening to any data that you're giving into a system, and can you trust this information that's coming back to you? And because this is what's coming out now, isn't it, from the author of Games of Thrones to others, where, hey, AI chat GBT, no, you can't just go and use my creations and put that into your system. So some of the companies I've been speaking to that are experimenting with AI, they're generally trying to build their own, data source as to which of where the information's coming from. So one company is a learning company, they're like primarily digital learning company, and they have built a data source. So when people use AI to help them create a program, which is quite a cool thing. So this AI will help you kind of, get the content from the system, put it together. Also, this AI would be a coach to the person that's learning that says, hey, how's it going? What have you done with this skill? Oh, what questions do you have? And those questions go back to the person that manages the content and goes, oh, okay, this is what's missing, So there's some great stuff there, but they can trust the data source. I was just reading something the other day so apparently the latest Workday conference just happened, and it was all about AI. So Workday stood up and says, we're using AI in all these ways. And they're sourcing, of course, all the data that's gone into Workday from all these organizations and all these people over this time. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? So and they're saying that they could create things where it will help the manager write a performance review, because it will go and source all this information about what's happening for this employee. What have they, what measurements have been put in, what has this employee done in this way, and quite quickly that flags things up of, well, hang on, what do we trust what's gone into this system? We already know that AI is full of biases that exist in society. So it's not that AI is biased, but it's got these biases where words written by someone from a different ethic background won't be seen as positive or confident, or so for me, there's a whole interesting space around AI is about to change how we work. But if we don't be part of the conversation of how it's used, what's happening with information, what is the information we're getting, and what do you do with that, as editors, then we could quickly lose that human concept of what's happening. And if no matter what, I think HR professionals play a role there for quite a while, at least. Yes, AI, like other jobs, I think I'd be more scared if I was a digital designer at the moment, like, but, if AI comes along and helps people teams run much better operations and be much more productive and efficient and, lots of data and information is at our fingertips, fab. But that ability to help an organization grow and develop and build values that people want to be part of, at the moment, that's still a very human thing. And I think more and more there's going to be a role for people like us to play that helps businesses make decisions around how do you use people's data, and what's happening here. And and also this, so at the moment, there's a role to play where we have to help organizations build the skills to know how to use AI. So we've still got a bit of way to go. I think AI for me, at the moment in the workplace and all this kind of stuff, it's like other tech that's come in. It's so new and it's, it's scary but exciting at the same time. And it's not really clear. And this is complexity. It's not totally, we know it's going to be a big impact, but we're not really clear of what that's going to look like yet. I'm actually more fearful of some of the conversations, podcasts and things I listen to from the likes of, the Google Godfather that just left. Was it Graham Hinton? That is telling me that, the generative AI system could become so powerful that we'll never be able to get human kind of autonomy back. That's the kind of stuff that scares the shit out of me. I think I'm allowed to swear. But HR at the moment isn't going to be involved in that.
Oh man, there's a great book. You just got me thinking about a book what I'm semi-reading at the moment. And let me get this. And it talks about AI. I realize it's not actually a new book actually either. It's been out for a while. I think it's called The Premonition. Let me double check. Let me have a look. The Precipice it's called.
Okay, yep.
And it talks about AI there. And there's an element of that where I'm like, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Have you heard of the paperclip example? So if you create, because the thing about AI and robots and is that it's based on the programming, isn't it? And it's based on the goal that you give that programming. And so if you say you program an AI machine to make the best paper clips ever, and that's its purpose, it keeps learning. So that I think that what scares me about AI is that instant application of learning. So even in this conversation, I've had to think about things, then I explain it to you. You have to think about it, process it. Then you might explain it to somebody else, or people listening to this podcast, they then explain it to, so that that building of learning and that sharing of learning, it takes time on a human level. There's something nice and cool about that, and imperfect, but it takes time. Where AI, it just copies and pastes, doesn't it? So, copy, paste, bang, 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 and then off you go. So this paperclip machine starts making paper clips, starts to acquire more knowledge to make the best paper clips ever. And what if it got so smart that it realizes to keep making paper clips, it has to eliminate humans because they are waste, they get in the way, and they need to, get rid of. So then this machine, and it keeps going, and maybe it, ruins the world for us to live in, but it keeps making paper clips and it keeps going. And that's apparently that's the concept, is that we have to be mindful now of what are we programming into these systems, because very quickly they gain the knowledge to do that and to be able to, and to do it the best way possible, and how to stop other people stopping them from doing that best way possible. And it goes from there. So, yeah.
Yeah, that scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, I know.
It's interesting you use the paperclip. So in my book, The Insightful Innovator, I talk about.
Oh, have you got a new book?
Yeah.
Yeah. Has it just been released?
It's just been released. Here it is in purple as we speak.
Oh, wow.
But I talk about how adults come up with ideas for paperclips versus children, and it's from a talk many years ago. And how the average adult can come up with like 10 to 12 different things around what a paperclip could be, and kids can come up with hundreds. And it's around they see a paperclip for what it can be versus what it is, the logical and whatever else. But then you think about it from an AI. The example you just go, oh, it's very logical. It's very
totally.
Yeah.
And they instantly, one AI system just transfers that learning immediately to the other AI system, and then and then goes and finds out more information, just keeps adding to that instantaneously. And so I suppose once I kind of understood that, I went, oh, okay, now I get it, why AI could get to the point where it's so knowledgeable and so powerful. And also, the scary thing is, why will it tell us? So if it now has worked out that we're in the way of making paper clips and you need to get rid of us, that it's not going to tell us, is it? It's gonna
Oh my days. I've been dreaming about paper clips tonight. I'm mindful we've been on here for an hour and 15 and we haven't talked about your new book. So new book is coming out early next year-ish, right?
Early next year, yeah.
Okay.
At some stage.
Tell me everything about the new book. Tell me everything about it.
Well, I got asked by the fantastic publisher Kogan Page to apply agility in the world of something that we love, learning and development and organizational development. So, and as many people know, I'm not a big believer in functional silos of human resources. So this is not saying that you just go and do this as a solo learning and development team. It's still about being multi-skilled and it's about solving business problems in the world of kind of learning and OD. But what I've also realized is that there are a lot of people out there that are the only L&D person, or there is an L&D team that are just starting out with Agile, or there's a people or function that some of their big topics is how do they create a skills-based talent process? How do they upskill, reskill? How do they redesign their organization and mobilize different skills to solve business problems? So a lot of what we're focusing on at the moment in human resources sits in this space. And so I'm taking everything I've learned since the last book of Agile HR, and I'm putting it into that area. It's called Agile L&D. But I like to think that anyone could access this book and use it. So if you're running an employee experience team, if you're running a whole HR function, but particularly if you're needing to solve problems that are linked to learning and OD, this is going to be helpful for you. And I've broken it into I call it the new organizational playbook, going back to your playbook. But it's about how do you work product-led, so what we've been talking about tonight. How do you apply human-centric design? How do you work in a T-shaped, and we can debate T-shaped, and anti-fragile way? I've realized my T is very different to your T, so we can talk about that. And how do you apply experimentation? And then how do you deliver with impact, which is ultimately putting it all together and understanding how do you really measure that value. And I interviewed yourself. I interviewed a bunch of fantastic, leaders from kind of L&D, OD background, HR background, product development background, agile coaching background, and and it's just full of really, I hope, the one feedback I got about the first book is that it's very practical. It's very, people actually use it as a tool on every day to help them, and I like to think this will be the same. So
nice. So how have you found writing this book compared to the Agile HR? Like how have you found, has it been differences in it, or?
Yeah. Well, it's also about sharing I know a lot more since I wrote the last one. So it's kind of sharing everything I've learned since then and sort of updating it, but also updating it for now. So, I'm talking about things like AI and other, but it's interesting because it's getting the balance right, because some of this is still really new for people. So it's helping people that are starting out with it through to how do you help people that have been doing this now for a few years and wanting to go to that next level. So it's trying to get that balance. Look, writing is just quite hard when it's not your day job. And I think you can relate to that. So, and I feel like every single thing has happened in my life to try and make it even harder too. That's complexity, isn't it? So, I've had everything lately to happen personally, which means that writing it's been a challenge. But it will be good to see it done.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think there's something with books which I found is the filtering of, because your book is constantly evolving, but like you say, with your thinking, right? And I look at my book now, I'm like, I could have added this in, and I could have put that in.
Why didn't I put this in? Yeah, exactly.
Even looking at it now, I'm like, right, I could have talked about jobs to be done in there, but I'm like, the spectrum of, like you say, the spectrum of the teams who are going to buy this is very different, And I guess the way I like to see, whether it be people experience, L&D, is you're either evolving or you're either in like evolution or you're in revolution. And it's hard to balance your book because you don't want to go too far this way.
Yes.
Because then there's 90% of people who won't get it. So have you found kind of juggling, within your Agile L&D, like how have you found juggling what stays in and what doesn't?
Oh, really hard. I've just been spending time on the human centered design chapter, and you can know too much about a topic and then get so caught up with what do you share and what don't you, and who do you reference and all this kind of stuff. So what I did a bit differently with this book that I really enjoyed is I interviewed a lot more people, and their stories I have just found so enriching, and it kind of is what I base each chapter on. So I introduce the chapter and I'll talk about why these different people started using this and how they're using it, and for me that's probably been it was just such a great thing to do. And I found that by telling it through people's stories, it's being a very powerful way to write it. And also it has helped to do that mix, because in all the people I interviewed, they would talk a bit about how they got started, and what did they regret, what did they get wrong, but then also maybe where they are now. And so I've brought in a lot of case studies to sort of help people at different stages of that journey. So I've got some case studies in there of, one team that I've worked with for a number of years that have now radically changed their structure of their whole HR or people function. And it's fully all based on these principles of product-led, T-shape, experimentation. It's amazing, but you're not going to go there straight away, but that's there so people can see it as an example of what you might move towards. But then I've also got another story of a team this is the first time they've applied Agile, and this is what it looks like, and this is how they've set up an experiment to design a leadership program, and talk through those steps. So I've tried to do that. I've got a good example of an experiment, working with experiments, which is a team where they wanted to go out and fix flexibility and hybrid working, how everyone. So they went in, and they, is a team that was familiar with Agile techniques. And so they wanted to do some great discovery work, so they went off and they did all these, personas and focus groups and interviews, and they got all this data and they had all this insight. And the head of HR that I was speaking to, she goes, and I thought, not a problem. We'll just get all this insight. We'll know what to solve for, and we'll just nail this. And of course, they came back with everyone thinks something different about flexibility and hybrid, and there's no one way to solve this problem. And so they actually realized they had to turn the whole thing into an experiment. And so what they started to do was ask teams at a very local level to solve the problem themselves. Okay, what does flexibility mean for you as a team, and how would you want to define it? And now run an experiment to see how it works. So, for example, they have an office in Spain, and they had a policy at that stage where people can choose what days they come into the office. But in Spain, there was quite a long commute. And what was happening is that there was no guarantee of who was going to be in the office when you came in. So people would do a long commute, come in, and then might only be a few other people in there, and it was a bit lonely. So as a whole office, they said, we want less choice, and we determine which days we're all in together in the office, but then have less days in the office overall. And so and that was quite different to what the policy was in the rest of the organization. And they ran that for 3 months. It went really well, could show productivity levels, and sales were good. So then they ran it for another 3 months, and now it's their accepted kind of policy. And so it was a nice example of you've got to actually just embrace an experimental approach to even try and solve some of these problems, because there is no one solution, one size fits all. So I've gone into but yeah, so stories like that is just a really nice. So for me, it's been nice to bring out these examples and help people learn in that way. Yeah.
Nice. And I guess you might not know the answer to this one. Can people pre-order the book? Is there anywhere they can go to kind of pre-order?
Oh, I think they can. I like with absolute I don't know, anxiety, worry. I saw that it was on the Kogan page website. It's actually got a spiel next to it that is totally different to what it should have. And I'm still debating what all that kind of. So, but yeah, I think you potentially can, which is quite scary. And next week, who knows if this is coming out whenever it is, but I'm going to be in Birmingham at the World of Learning, which has, and you have an author session where people can come and talk to you about the book, and you sign the book, and and in that World of Learning, they're telling everyone about the next book. So I better get it done.
Yeah, people will be kicking your door down. Where's this book? Where's
this book?
So many L&D people will be screaming out for it. We need it.
I know.
I guess I've got a couple more questions, and I won't be mindful of your time. It's getting late. You talk about being a chief HR trend watcher. Tell me what that. Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, I look out. So I run a company called PXO Culture, and PXO, by the way, stands for People, Experience, and Operations. And then a few years ago, I knew someone called Tom Hack for a long time, and he did run something called the HR Trend Institute. Anyway, he's a really fun, very direct Dutch guy who has always been known to speak his mind about human resources topics. And we've known each other for a long time. We met years ago around the concept of agility, and I actually got him to speak at some of my very early meetups. I used to, years ago, before a pandemic and things, I used to run a lot of face-to-face agile HR meetups and just bring people together and learn from each other. And so during the pandemic, we teamed up and we started doing these videos called Talking HR Trends. And some people can look them up. They were lots of fun, and we were known for challenging some of the traditional thinking. And we're also known as this little dynamic where I'm kind of the happy Aussie that tries to be positive about things, and he just comes in and, just slams it with this, harsh reality. For example, I remember we're talking about people strategy or something. I'm like, I say this topic, we're talking about people strategy, and it's a time of year where people are, needing to create their strategy and da. And then he will say something like, well, most teams I know don't even make a strategy. So if they're making a strategy, that's a good start, but it's kind of, so he's, so we had this dynamic. Anyway, he's a bit older and he wanted to retire, and he kind of gifted me this Agile Trend Institute website that he had built up and has a lot of followers, and so I took that on at the early part of this year. Life means that I haven't done as much with it as I would like to yet. But I do a lot of talks around trends as often. And so I do spend a lot of time with HR teams looking at what are the trends, what does this mean for your own strategy? What opportunities or challenges does it present? And so it has been a whole new space that I have started to get into because of Tom. Yeah. And
I think it's needed. It's interesting when we talk about trends and early signals, and I think there's a lot where I go, it's not a trend anymore. I was having this conversation with it was just today. I was having a podcast today, and I was like, Bedeck, when I started in L&D in 2014, the presentations are still the presentations what I seen before I left 5 years ago. I'm just like,
yeah.
The trends aren't trends anymore. It's just a case of we're just going to say some stuff and rename it.
I know. Well, the trend debate I think is really interesting because things are moving so quickly now. What really is a trend and what is so I talk a lot about and I'm trying to sort of decide how do I bring this into the Trend Institute a bit more. But it's because I suppose two things. One is Tom did this sort of the trends of every year for every night. And we did one at the start of or the end of last year for this year together when he kind of handed it over to me. And I've realized that Tom's been talking about stuff that's way ahead of others for year, and so I go to some of these conferences and they're talking about what Tom was talking about 5 years ago as now. So there was also a bit of how, you can be too forward in some ways, but I see it more as now there's mega trends at play that then have immediate responses of what's going on in here and now. So the mega trend is, of course, digitalization. The most immediate here and now is AI and But at the start of the year, I actually predicted that VR was going to be more influential because, and then along came ChatGPT. And so I try and, so these days I kind of talk about how it's playing out. So, okay, pace of change, digitalization, it's totally changed the way that we're working and we're engaging with each other. So what's some of the more immediate kind of examples of that? But also what does that mean in terms of priorities for your business? Because digitalization is going to mean different things. Do you need to digitalize your product because it's not? Or are you already in that industry? So what does that mean? Are you needing to digitalize the employee experience, or are you already along that journey? Are you bringing an AI in because, that kind of thing. So it depends on where you're at, isn't it, as to what that mega trend means for you.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's needed. I think I love the idea of doomsday prepping. And when I say doomsday, I mean in the best way. But I think, have you ever come across the 4 Ps, the 4 corners of possibility, I think it is, 4 corners of futures.
Yeah.
And I use that quite a lot. In my design, and it's more for thinking more than anything. But I really enjoy it. I enjoy going, okay, what's a possible, what's a plausible, what's a probable, all that good stuff. And I think there's something to it. And I was working with a tech company a few years ago, actually, probably about, when did COVID happen? I can't remember when, 2020. So it must have been 2018. And I did some work with a tech company, and it was looking at, we did war games testing on strategy. I was like, what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? Let's just challenge it. And we threw one in there, which was like a big pandemic. And it was interesting, the strategy, what we kind of said, well, the strategy would adapt here and it'd pivot, was the approach we took to the HR.
Interesting.
And it wasn't by design, it was by pure fluke. Like, it wasn't me being some sort of mastermind, it was just pure accident. It was one of the things we played. And I think it's really needed. I think for me personally, I have an appetite for going, let me look into the future 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And I enjoy being like the futurist, thinking of it all. So yeah, it's cool. And I'm looking forward to when you get a minute to breathe, first and foremost, with what you're going to do with that for sure. I guess.
I also talk about with trends, it's about, so I actually think it's about, well, first of all, knowing not to be the magpie. So the magpie goes after the shiny new thing. So, so skills is a great example. So a key trend at the moment is this shift going away from job roles and functions to skills. And, someone can have multiple roles, because they've got different skills to contribute. And they might work on a project here. They might be a team leader over here. They might go and contribute to this problem solving thing over there. We know that we're moving towards that approach. The danger, however, is that you've got big providers out there now selling you, oh, you need to build a skills inventory. You need to go and do, and so knowing the trend and having a conversation around the trend and what does it mean for different things, like how would you hire for skills instead of job descriptions? How would you build teams? How would you design skills programs? That means you can make a more educated kind of view as to, well, do I really need a skills inventory at the moment? Or is this just, peddling off the back of a new hot topic? And if I do a skills inventory, then what's the problem I'm solving with it? How would I use it, et cetera, et cetera? So the other one is managing your HIPPO, so the highest paid person's opinion, who on the In-Flight magazine has picked up the In-Flight magazine and reads, oh, it's all about skills. We should, and they come in, right, we've got to have a skills inventory. We've got to start hiring, and they go and, essentially push the solution out there based on the latest trend. And if you're knowledgeable about your trend, you can say, oh, that's a great idea, but, let's just think about it, and you can talk about what's going on, what other examples are happening, why would a skill inventory be good or bad, all that kind of stuff. So for me, it's about helping HR professionals be more evidence-based in it as well. Don't get excited about the latest idea and trend, but understand where is it coming from and why is it changing the world of work and what does it mean for your context.
Nice.
I think that's important.
Definitely. I think what that is it's the difference between the fad and the trend. Like when I look at it, like trend is denim. Denim started out as overalls and it's still here today. Like a fad is like something like poppers. Remember them pants where they would pop and the pop up and it's like, that's it. It's a fad. Be done. And I guess
the fad is even stonewash has come back, I suppose. Denim on denim, that's a latest one where a few years ago you couldn't wear denim and a denim jacket and a pair of denim jeans, but now you can. So I suppose, but is that's not really the trend? That's just the fad. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think I was at a conference 2 weeks ago in Edinburgh. And it was an innovation conference, because that's tends to be where I go now. I go to design, product, innovation conferences, and it was funny. The R&D team was saying how we came up with like AI in 2017, and they went to the board, and the board was like, "No, we're not doing that." And then a couple of years later, one of the boards was drinking wine, watching what was it called? Is it whatever Machina? I think it is some AI.
Movie. Yeah.
And they messaged him going, "I think we need this in our app." And like, we told you about this 4 years ago. Like, what's going on? So that kind of highest person's opinion is such a good point.
Totally, and being able to then manage that, either convince them at the time why they need to consider AI, and but also when they now say, "Oh, we need AI," you're like, "All right. Fine, but why? What's the problem?" And you're already knowledgeable about the trend that they're talking about. So Nice. And in the people space, people get a little bit carried away with the latest fad and hot, latest tool, the latest psychometric or whatever. And we've always got to manage that carefully.
Definitely. I guess I want to go full circle and go and bring it to an end. And
back to my Rage Against the Machine memory.
You've got these memories of being like an activist and like you've kind of clearly have that activist and that energy. And I guess the book what you're writing now is around kind of agile L&D. And as we know, we never really stop growing older. We never really stop developing. And I guess if I was to ask you right now, what do you want to be when you grow older? What would you say?
What do I? Well, for me, it's more about um, continuing that activist theme. I suppose is that I want to help save the planet. I I am. So if we think about my life, I've traveled, I've lived in lots of different places, and I've seen some wonderful, beautiful, magical things. And what's really scaring me is that they're disappearing. And I come from Australia, and I go home very regularly, and it's getting hotter and hotter, and there's less of my favorite birds, and all those kind of things. So and I think it's interesting because being in an environment where I help businesses solve problems. And one of the biggest problems now is how do we run business in a way that that is sustainable for our world, and will mean that there will be a world for humans, at least for however long, and I'll still be around because the ice all hasn't melted, and we're not all underwater. So for me, it's that. Not sure if that constitutes a particular role or anything, but I know that I want to be part of helping businesses, product designers, and just kind of community work out how do we do this in a more sustainable way, because there has to be, surely we can solve this problem, we created it, so surely we can.
Yeah.
And I do think, the values of Agile that I talked about, it's complex, it's a really hard problem, but if we get people together and multi-skilled, we can solve it. And if we have that proactive belief of improving, and yes, we can save this thing that we value, then surely we can find the solution.
Nice, beautiful put. Where can people find out a little bit more? Where can people follow you? Where can people buy the book? Where can people pre-order a book? Where do we go?
Well, I'm the only Natal Dank around. I haven't had not even a Natal, actually. So I'm quite easy to find on LinkedIn because of the name. And I'm pxoculture.com or the hrtrendinstitute.com. And of course, Kogan Page is my publisher. So you can go over there and on all good, what is it? Book suppliers, Amazon, etc. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm not on Twitter at the moment because it went X and I don't know what to think about it. So just contact me on LinkedIn.
Natal, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.